Greetings, my name is Suzanne Lusnia, and I am an Associate Professor of Classical Studies at Tulane University in New Orleans, in Louisiana. I want to thank Anthony Smart for inviting me to share my research on Severan topography and monuments in Rome in this public lecture series on imperial power in the Roman world, sponsored by York St. John University. The reign of Septimius Severus impacted the topography of ancient Rome with the creation of several new and innovative structures, the repair of infrastructure, and the renovation of earlier imperial buildings. In this talk, we'll look at how the Roman Forum was shaped under Septimius Severus and its place in his political messages about power, legitimacy, and dynastic succession. Before we look at the Forum, however, there are a couple of points about Severus's ascent to the imperial throne that should be noted. Commodus was the emperor that had preceded him with the longest reign. He had been in power as a sole emperor from 180 to 192. But during his reign in the last year, there was at least one major fire that we hear of, and it probably occurred in March or April of 192. And it was seen as sort of the presage to the downfall of Commodus as he was murdered at the end of that year. It broke out at the Templum Pockets, and the slide shows the dark red buildings, sort of bright red buildings, which are marked as the year 192 CE. So the Templum Pockets, an ancient warehouse known as the Horia Piperataria, parts of the Temple of Vesta and the Atrium Vestae, where the Vestal Virgins lived, parts of the Palatine Palace and various other structures were damaged in this fire. So this sets up a certain situation in terms of the buildings in Rome. As I said, Commodus was murdered on New Year's Eve of the year 192, and taking over at that point was Pertinax. He had been the urban prefect, and he became emperor, but only lasted until March 28th of the year 193, when, after a dispute in the midst of a dispute with the Praetorian Guard, he was murdered. Didius Julianus manages to gain the favor of the Praetorian Guard at that moment instead of the father-in-law of Pertinax, Sulpicianus, who had also been trying to gain their favor at that moment. And so Didius Julianus becomes the emperor. However, he doesn't last very long. He is out by the June 1st, lasting only 66 days. Septimius had been declared emperor, or hailed as emperor by his troops, probably around April 11th, so very soon after the murder of Pertinax. In the east, there was another challenger, Pescennius Niger, who was governor of Syria. And to the northwest in Britain, there was Clodius Albinus. And so there was a number of people vying for the throne at that moment. But as we say, Didius, he's the first one knocked out of that group by the approach of Septimius Severus, who arrives in Rome with the backing of troops in the very beginning of June. And on June 1st, we're told that the Senate had already declared Didius an enemy of the state, and he was assassinated or executed in the palace. So when Septimius arrives, there's a lot going on. He still has rivals that he's going to have to deal with. And there are, of course, problems that need solving along the way, and it takes several years. But chief among these problems is establishing his own legitimacy to be emperor. And so one of the things that he seems to have done from very early on is to claim that he was favored by the gods, that he had divine favor. And there was a published series of omens of these sort of dreams and predictions, miraculous events that were supposed to establish this divine favor. A couple of years later, in 195, he pronounced himself the son of Marcus Aurelius, and this made Commodus his brother. Commodus becomes deified around this time. And he also Septimius also renames his son as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. We know him better as Caracalla. And so this is, sort of making these ties to the Antonine dynasty that had preceded. Rome, as a city, was also being promoted as the sacred seat, the urbs sacra, of the divine family, the divine imperial family. And imperial celebrations that took place in the year 202 were focused on the declared Parthian triumph, the 10th anniversary of Severus's rule, and the wedding of his elder son Caracalla with the daughter of the Praetorian prefect. Her name was Plautilla. So the Roman Forum was the center of political, social, and business life in ancient Rome. From its emergence from the late 7th or early 6th century BCE down to the late Empire, the Roman Forum provided meeting places for the governing bodies of Rome, displayed numerous honorific monuments, and housed religious cults vital to the Roman state. Even after the construction of the various so-called imperial fora, maintenance and elaboration of the Roman Forum was still a significant aspect of imperial building at Rome. For Severus, the fire of 192 created not only the need to rebuild part of the Forum, but also the opportunity to impose his own program upon it. Thus, the lower Forum, called Imum Forum, the real true heart of the Roman Forum, was substantially reworked during the reign of Severus. Many of the projects of the Forum were finished or nearing completion in 202. This is the year that, as I've already mentioned, Severus was celebrating his Parthian triumph and marked his 10th anniversary as emperor. And this may have been, an intentional sort of coincidence to make sure that these buildings were ready and that the area was sufficiently decorated, adorned for the various processions that would take place that year, for that 10th anniversary decennalia, for the Parthian triumph, and for the wedding of his elder son Caracalla. And we know for that wedding there were processions that went back and forth between the Palatine and the Capitoline Hills, and so directly crossing the Forum several times. The Severan repairs to this area enhanced structures that were associated with legendary tales of Rome, as well as some of the most renowned historical figures, and this was true in other parts of the city as well. Since the late Republic, the Forum had become increasingly museum-like, filled with honorific monuments, a representation of Roman power and authority. It is my contention that Septimius Severus laid claim to this space in a way not seen since the time of Augustus. Through the restoration of existing structures and the careful placement of new monuments within the space under Severus, the Roman Forum was reshaped to create an environment similar to that experienced in one of the nearby imperial fora, such as the Forum of Augustus. Yet the Severan Forum achieved this without actually having to acquire land and build a new public square. Severus's projects reflect a conscious effort to situate himself within the context of traditional Roman history, while at the same time promoting his new dynasty. Just as he had seized political and military power, so Severus usurped the age-old manifestation of that authority, the Roman Forum. The projects included reconstruction of the Temple of Vesta along with repairs to the residence of the Vestals, restoration of the pavement of the Forum, installation of an equestrian statue of Severus, construction of a triumphal arch dedicated to the emperor and his sons, and the restoration of the temple of deified Vespasian. In this talk, I'm focusing on the lower Forum area with the equestrian statue, the arch, and the restoration of the Temple of Vesta. So first, let's take a tour of this Severan work in the Forum, and then conclude with a brief analysis of it. There is evidence of Severan paving work around his new triumphal arch, and around the rostra, the speaker's platform, and the equestrian monument and Temple of Vesta. And you're looking at an area associated with the Lacus Curtius, but also somewhat near the area where the equestrian of Severus likely stood. 3 different paving levels can be found viewed within the lower Forum area. Each is composed of travertine slabs. The last level of travertine pavement in the lower forum, that is to say the highest level, the one on which present-day visitors to the Roman Forum walk, is Severan. It was laid down sometime around 203 or perhaps a little earlier, in conjunction with the construction of the Arch of Severus and the alterations to the rostra that were needed because of that arch. This repaving did nothing more than bring the level of the existing area into alignment with the new levels created by the construction of the new Severan triumphal arch. It's worth noting, however, that in the process of restoring and raising the pavement level, the inscription of Lucius Naevius Sardinus, with its Augustan associations, was preserved. Sardinus had been one of the prominent men encouraged by Augustus to undertake building and restoration projects to aid in rebuilding Rome after the civil wars of the Roman Republic. He responded to Augustus's call for private involvement in public works by repaving the Forum in the year 10 BC or thereabouts. The preservation of this inscription shows an awareness on the part of Severus and his project managers of the historical significance of the Forum and its monuments, as well as a desire to conserve ties to the past, especially those that would connect him with figures such as Augustus. We shall return to this theme in our discussion shortly. An equestrian statue of Severus was erected in the central forum. However, it is known to us only through literary references and representations on coins. The reverse type for the statue was first issued in 201. The legend Optimus Princeps, or the best emperor, accompanies the type, reflecting a phrase that was part of the titulature of the Emperor Trajan after his conquest of the Dacians. This statue is connected to one of the omnia imperii, as they're called, these signs of imperial power, miraculous signs that proved Severus's destiny to become emperor. Cassius Dio, the historian who was a senator during the Severan period, wrote a pamphlet detailing the 7 signs that the emperor claimed as a basis for divine sanction of his legitimacy. That pamphlet is now lost, but Dio's history includes a summary list of the omina, and the historian Herodian gives a full account of one sign, a dream that Severus had following the murder of Pertinax. In this dream, he saw, as Herodian writes, a fine, large horse wearing imperial trappings, carrying Pertinax down the middle of the Via Sacra in Rome. As it came to the entrance of the Forum at the point where the popular meetings used to take place in Republican days, the horse appeared to shake off Pertinax and throw him down. While Severus was just standing there, the horse got down under him and carried him off on his back without mishap until it stood in the middle of the Forum, where it held him up high for everyone to see and honor. Today there is still a huge bronze statue on that spot to commemorate the dream. The exact location of the Equestrian monument is not certain because it did not survive antiquity. However, based upon the account of Severus's dream, joined with archaeological evidence in the central forum, the representations of the statue on coins, it's possible to suggest a site for the statue and to speculate on its appearance. As we heard in Herodian's account of Severus's dream, the horse carrying Pertinax entered the forum on the Via Sacra and stopped at the area where Herodian says popular meetings used to take place in the Republican days. This means that the horse stopped and threw off Pertinax at a point very near to where the Comitium once stood in front of the Curia Julia, and opens up the possibility that the Arch of Severus actually marks the spot where the fateful exchange of riders occurred. Next, Herodian relates how the horse, after putting Severus on its back, carried him to the middle of the forum. And it is on this spot that the commemorative statue was erected. The only open area of the forum at that time was the area bounded by the rostrum on the west, the Temple of Divas Julius on the east, the Basilica Aemilia on the north, and the Basilica Julia along the south. So this area here. The equestrian statue of Severus must have been located at some central spot within this area. Turning now to the appearance of the statue, our primary evidence is from the coins first issued in the year 201. The type shows Severus in military dress, tunic and cuirass, with downturned vertical spear in his left hand, and holding a statuette of Victory who stands on an orb in his right hand. His horse strides forward with its right leg raised. Likewise, the surviving equestrian of Marcus Aurelius has the emperor wearing military dress, but unarmed. The statue of Septimius Severus probably resembled that of Marcus, both in its grand scale and general appearance. Severus, after all, would not have passed on the opportunity to draw a connection between himself and his proclaimed father, and in fact his official portraits often imitated those of Marcus, especially after the year 195 when he made that declaration. The equestrian statue of Severus, however, does not seem to have included a captive barbarian in the composition, as is generally suggested was part of the Marcus Aurelius setting. There's no need to assume, in fact, that his statue was grouped with a barbarian, because the message of the Severan monument was that he became emperor through the divine will of the gods. His portrayal with the attributes of Jupiter, a long spear or scepter, and the statue of Victory perched on the orb, expressed the providentia deorum, or the divine foresight of the gods, evident throughout Dio's and Herodian's narratives of these signs of Severus's imperial destiny. Framed among historic dedications, the equestrian statue of Severus became the focal point of the lower Forum area. The statue reflected the important role that dreams played in Severus's propaganda and his promotion of these omens of imperial power that predicted and therefore validated his reign as emperor. Indeed, the dream that prompted the creation of this equestrian statue may have, as I mentioned, influenced the placement of the Severan arch in the Roman Forum. The arch stands nearly complete, though badly weathered, between the Curia Julia, which would be on the right as you're viewing this, and the rostrum on the left, at the northwest corner of the Forum. The gilded bronze letters of the inscription no longer exist, but the inscription itself is legible. The ground level around the arch has changed considerably over time, but there were always either a ramp or stairs leading up through the arch as a passageway on the east, leading you from the east to the west side of it. The inscription announces that the arch was given by the Senate and Roman people to Severus and Caracalla in honor of their victories. The younger son, Geta, was also once included in this dedication, but all references to him were erased following his murder in 211. And you can sort of see the shadow in the fourth line of the inscription of how it was carved back and then recarved with new letters. An additional set of honorary titles for Severus and Caracalla were substituted in that line, in place of Geta's name and titles. The victory titles given to Severus, Parthicus Arabicus and Parthicus Adiabenicus, would seem to indicate that the honors that are commemorated by this arch were originally vowed in 195. This would be following his defeat of Pescennius Niger and the conclusion of the First Parthian campaign. The tribunician years of the dedication for Severus and Caracalla, though, show that the arch was formally dedicated in the year 203. According to the two final lines of the inscription, Severus and his sons received the honor of this triumphal arch, quote, on account of their restoration of the state, rem publicam, and the expansion of the dominion of the Roman people, for their extraordinary virtues both at home and abroad. Severus brought peace through the restoration of the state after both foreign and civil wars, and prosperity by extending Roman rule in Mesopotamia. One last note of interest in regard to this inscription is the text. In the text, Severus is called simply son of Marcus. This is a reference to that proclamation that he was the adopted son and therefore legitimate heir and successor to Marcus Aurelius. Severus usually advertised this in very long genealogical inscriptions, especially from 195 to about 202. But here the reference is very short and very subtle. And some have argued that this reflects the intervention of the Senate, which disliked the emperor's claim of Antonine ancestry. But in fact, if you have had the chance, as I have, to survey these inscriptions across geography and time, what you find is that by 203, Severus's use of this lengthy titulature, especially in Rome, has really dropped off, and the filial connections that he had been claiming in inscriptions all the way back to Nerva, so that he would be son of Marcus, grandson of Antoninus Pius, great-grandson of Hadrian, great-great-grandson of Trajan, and great-great-great-grandson of Nerva. Those inscriptions were basically kind of disappearing gradually and appearing far less frequently by the year 203. So it's perhaps not surprising that this inscription only calls him son of Marcus. The sculptural decoration is worth making note of, and on the arch it reflects themes that were current in the propaganda of Severus in other media, especially those connected with the celebration of his triumph and his decennalia, the 10th anniversary in 202. First, there are the figures that adorn the keystones and the spandrels of the central and lateral passages. On both the east and west keystones of the central arch, remember there are 3 passageways in this arch, so at the central one we have keystones that illustrate figures of Mars as youthful and beardless, dressed in full armor and hoisting a trophy up on his shoulder, and you can see that in the right hand side of this slide. Each figure probably also held a spear in his right hand. Now, flanking the Mars figures are the spandrels in these sort of roughly triangular areas above the arch, and these are victories, and below them seasons, so personifications, in the 4 spandrels of the central archway. The victories are nearly twice life-size in their portrayal, and they carry Parthian trophies, that is to say, these sort of combinations of armor, helmet, and garb on a stick that would have been set up as a field trophy for victories, and so they carry these as symbolic of the victory over the Parthians. And they appear, because of the way they're facing towards Mars on the keystones there at the center, to be offering these trophies to Mars. Below each victory is a male figure with wings, semi-draped, youthful, and bearing a particular attribute. The attributes, what they hold, the seasons, their clothing, this all identifies these 4 figures as the 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, and autumn. Winter and spring appear on the southeast and northeast spandrels, respectively, while summer and autumn, which you see here, are on the northwest and southwest spandrels. The art historian Richard Brilliant proposed that these figures guided the viewers through the proper reading of the monument. That is, one starts from the southeast face, the figure of winter, moving through the seasons in counterclockwise circular path around the arch from left to right. The keystones of the 2 lateral bays are very poorly preserved, and they likely had 4 different personifications. Only one of these now is identifiable with any sort of certainty, and that's the one you see on the screen now. This is the one on the northwest keystone, and this is a figure of Hercules. The spandrels on the lateral bays, that is to say, the figures that, again, are in these sort of triangular areas to either side of the keystones there, are river gods, and they are paired the same way across each on both faces, one youthful and one aged, elderly looking river god. And we'll talk a little more about those in a moment too. Above the lateral bays of this arch, there are little strip friezes, not so little, but strips of friezes, 4 of them. They're all basically identical. They depict the Pompa Triumphalis, that is to say, the triumphal parade. And this is calling to mind the triumph that was held in 202 for Severus's Parthian campaigns. The figures in the procession move from left to right. The frieze consists of 4 distinct but repeating sections. In the center, there is the personification of the conquered Parthia. She has her Parthian cap. She's sitting on a rock, and she's very slumped over in this very sort of defeated pose. And she's being presented to the figure at the far right, a helmeted woman seated enthroned with a shield, and to whom the soldiers are sort of offering all of the spoils of war. And this is the personification of Roma there at the far right. Completing the images of conquest, victory and conquest, are the plinths beneath the columns that are adorning both the east and west facades of the arch. And here we have these pedestals that have carvings that portray either a single or double pair of figures consisting of a Roman soldier leading a Parthian prisoner or prisoners. In some cases, we even have a panel where the Parthian prisoner, as you can see on the right-hand image, is carrying a young child, even perhaps a baby. And so, again, symbolizing the conquest of the soldiers, but also the enslavement of individuals from the Parthian realm. Above each lateral bay on both faces of the arch are large, elaborately sculpted reliefs, commonly known as the Great Panels. These represent a conflation of scenes from the first and second Parthian campaigns carried out by Severus. The emperor appears at least once in every panel, and in some instances he is accompanied by his sons Caracalla and Geta. The panel images most likely reflect a series of paintings made during the campaigns, and here again we have some literary references to this. Herodian tells us that while Severus was on campaign, he dispatched a report to the Senate and people, making much of his achievements, and ordering that his battles and victories should be painted and publicly displayed. Paintings of this sort were usually carried in triumphal processions to inform the public about the battles and conquests that ultimately led to the triumphs celebrated at Rome. The scenes of the great panels focus on the siege and capitulation of Parthian cities, and thus each panel scene represents a single geographic location. This trait provides a strong link between the panels and triumphal paintings, as does their use of tipped perspective and specific architectural settings to define the locations of the battles. The great panels should be read from left to right, starting at the southeast face, following the season figures through their cycle. The individual panels are subdivided into 2 or 3 registers, which are read from the bottom to the top. And so we have at the southeast, again badly weathered, but scenes of siege and capitulation and the battle at Nisibis. On the northeast, the siege and battle at Edessa. And in the upper right of the scene, you can see that would be the emperor standing and addressing the troops after their taking of the city of Edessa. On the northwest, we have a panel of a city that's surrounded, has at least one river running by it. So it is either Seleucia or Babylon. It's not entirely clear, so we're looking at perhaps the Tigris River or the Euphrates of Mesopotamia. And again, a siege and then a capitulation. And then we see siege machines approaching again a walled city in the southwest panel. And then again at the top, the siege machine and a city that is now, again, either has capitulated, and this is generally read as Ctesiphon, the capital city of the Parthians, and therefore the end of the campaigns, which would have ended in fall of 197. The great panels of the arch signal a new use of war imagery in triumphal monuments. Before the Severan period, triumphal monuments employed allegorical symbols of battle and conquest, depicting the triumphal procession, the spoils, the captive prisoners, trophies, and figures of victory. The Arch of Severus places the acts of war, that is to say the battles and the battlefield, directly alongside these allegories, offering a vivid portrayal of the events during the campaigns. It could be argued that this might reflect the influence of the columns of Trajan and Marcus Aurelius, which had both been created in the preceding century. And these both illustrate numerous and often brutal battle scenes. On the other hand, the battle scenes on this arch may have a more direct connection with the dynastic message of Severan propaganda. In a sense, the Severan dynasty arose on the Parthian battlefields. Severus appointed his elder son Caracalla, his co-Augustus, after the capture of Ctesiphon in the battle when the city fell in the year 197. Although both the official declaration of the Parthian victory and the announcements of Caracalla's elevation to co-Augustus were officially commemorated on January 28th in 198. The battle scenes on the Arch of Severus, in my opinion, not only glorified the military deeds of the emperor and his sons, but also stood as a record of the legitimacy of his son's succession, and thus the continuation of Severan rule in Rome. Taken as a whole, the Arch of Septimius Severus combines themes of imperial victory, dynastic continuity, and the prosperity of the Roman people. These themes were emphasized in particular during the years 201 and 202 as the imperial family prepared to return to Rome and celebrate the official triumph, along with the emperor's 10th anniversary and the wedding of Caracalla and Plautilla. The theme Felicitas Temporum, the happiness of the times, and its accompanying ideas of fertility and prosperity are displayed in the arch's use of the seasons and the pairs of aged and youthful river gods, the latter of which may refer to the old and new boundaries of the empire, that is, the Tiber at Rome and the Tigris in Mesopotamia. Peace, and hence prosperity, achieved through military victory is symbolized in the triumphal procession with the defeated Parthia and the spoils of war brought to Rome, as well as in the pedestal reliefs depicting the Parthian prisoners led by their Roman captors. Coins issued in 204 and again in 206 depict the arch with its triple bays, columnar facade, and Attic statuary, which we can no longer see today. At the center of this group of sculptures, once arrayed along the roof of the attic, was a gilded bronze statue of Severus in his triumphal chariot pulled by at least 6 horses. Flanking him were 2 equestrian statues, one of Caracalla and another of Geta, also of gilded bronze. Next to these stood other figures, perhaps trophy bearers and Parthian captives in submissive positions. This arch was the first major monument built in the Forum since the reign of Hadrian, and its location is steeped with significance. The arch stands adjacent to the Rostra Augusti, which was itself associated with military triumph, originally decorated with the prows of captured warships. On the side of the arch, one side of the arch, faced the Capitoline Hill, where all the victorious generals dedicated a portion of their spoils to Jupiter, and the other side looked towards Severus's equestrian statue and to several Augustan monuments. On a diagonal line across the expanse of the Forum stood the Parthian Arch of Augustus, with its innovative triportal design. The Severan arch can be seen as a, quote, deliberate echo of the Augustan monument, to borrow Brilliant's phrase, and surely there must have been some conscious attempt at imitation of such a nearby model, since both arches celebrated Parthian victories. The placement of the arch in the Forum instead of elsewhere in the city, where space would have been less constrained, is clearly significant. Severus must have chosen this location as a means of deliberately associating himself with Augustus by constructing his arch within the context of numerous Julio-Claudian structures. Immediately beside the arch to its south is the Rostrum Augusti, and on its north side is the Curia Julia, both projects completed by the Emperor Augustus. Along the north edge of the Forum is the Basilica Aemilia, restored by Augustus, and once decorated with the deeds of Romulus, Aeneas, and other legendary forebears of Rome, as well as with figures of Parthian prisoners carved of richly colored marbles. Directly opposite the arch, to the east, was the Porticus of Gaius and Lucius, dedicated to the adopted sons of Augustus, the erstwhile heirs to his legacy. Severus's hope for a dynasty lay in his own two sons, Caracalla and Geta, and this was widely promoted on coins, in inscriptions, and on the arch itself. Also along the east side of the lower forum is the Temple of Divas Julius, this temple of deified Julius Caesar, and to its south the aforementioned Parthian arch of Augustus. Once stood here close by, and along the southern forum from west to east we have the Temple of the Dioscuri. That was something restored under Augustus and Tiberius later. And then also the Basilica Julia, originally constructed by Julius Caesar, but later rededicated to the memory of Gaius and Lucius when it was rebuilt by Augustus in the year 12. Finally, between the Basilica Julia and the Temple of Saturn, there was an arch erected in 16, celebrating Tiberius's recovery of the standards lost by Verus in Germany, just as the Parthian arch of Augustus, directly east of it, had marked the return of the standards of Crassus that had been lost in 53 BCE, but were returned to Rome in 20 BCE. With the completion of the Severan arch, the whole of the lower forum now was wreathed with triumphal monuments, and as Brilliant has noted, the four corners of the forum were defined by monuments with a common historical relation. Towering over the point where triumphal processions would turn to climb up the Clivus Capitolinus, that is to say, the road that led to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, where a portion of the spoils of war were dedicated, the arch had a commanding position opposite the Curia Julia. The great panels, once richly painted and full of color, would have reminded the viewer of the paintings that had been displayed to the Senate in that very meeting house. All around the arch were images of victory and triumph and places associated with stages of the triumphal celebration, such as the Curia Julia, with its altar of victory, and the Carcer, where enemy kings were executed following their public humiliation in the triumph. Perhaps the arch was also meant to remind the senators of Severus's strength, of how he had already dealt harshly with his two challengers and their supporters, some of whom had been senators. Besides all this, the arch stands on the edge of the area where the old Comitium used to be. In Herodian's account of the dream in which the horse-carrying Pertinax tosses off his rider and picks up Severus, the exchange occurs at the place where the public assemblies were once held. That is, the Comitium. By building the arch in the Roman Forum, Severus intentionally placed himself in a dialogue with the past, associating himself with the memorials of the great men and events of Rome's history. Severus's dialogue with the past also included restoring the temple of the deified Vespasian, just to the southwest of the Severan arch. Nestled beneath the Porticus Deorum Consentium and the Temple of Concord on the slope of the Capitoline Hill, the Temple of Vespasian faces the Clivus Capitolinus, the road ascending the hill behind the Rostra Augusti, passing by the Temple of Saturn. The rear of the temple was set flush against the wall of the tabularium, or so-called tabularium, depending on your viewpoint, constructed on a high podium. The building is 33 meters long and 22 meters wide. The temple faces eastward and once had a facade of 6 Corinthian columns. Only 3 columns at the right front corner survive, and the architrave resting upon them are what we can see today. A frontal staircase once gave access to the temple, and inside its cella was paved in marble, some fragments of which are still preserved along the rear wall. The exterior of the temple was white marble. The Emperor Titus began construction of this temple for his father Vespasian in either late in 79 or early 80, but he was prevented from completing it by his own untimely death in 81. His brother Domitian completed the temple sometime before the end of 86, and it has long been thought that the temple was dedicated then to both Vespasian and Titus, but the inscription names only Vespasian. Little of the inscription remains today, but the full text has been preserved in a medieval manuscript. The original frieze and architrave arrangement of the entablature were obliterated when the second line of the inscription was added to commemorate the Severin Restoration. The remaining frieze is decorated with implements pertaining to sacrifice and religious rituals, a symbol of imperial piety. This same decorative motif is seen in two other Severin works in Rome, on the Temple of Vesta in the Forum, and the Arch of the Argentarii in the Forum Boarium, which was the cattle market a bit south of the Roman Forum. The Severin restorations of Flavian structures, such as this temple, also the imperial palace on the Palatine, and the Temple of Peace, which had been originally constructed under Vespasian, damaged in the fire of 192, had a strong impact on the architectural ornament used in Severin buildings. Severin architects and workshops adopted the so-called Riberian Rings, which are these little spectacles, sometimes called spectacles, the little rings that show up between the dentils on the elaborate architectural decorations that were used on the cornices of these buildings. And you can see on the left of this slide the so-called Riberian Rings between the dentils there, and on the right you can see the Severin version of these Riberian Rings that comes from one of the moldings on the Porta Argentariorum. The Severin restoration of the Temple of Vespasian was likely to have been undertaken and completed before 203. This puts the restoration within the context of the general refurbishment and embellishment of the Roman Forum, undertaken in part to prepare for the triumphal festivities of 202. Little is known about the substance of the Severin work on this temple, but the prominent display of the names of Severus and his son on the building suggests that the emperor was hoping to draw upon comparisons that might be made between himself and Vespasian. Severus, like Vespasian, had achieved military victory in the east. Moreover, each had been proclaimed emperor by his troops while off in the provinces, Vespasian in Judea and Severus in Pannonia. Vespasian had been an usurper, in a sense, who had fought off two challengers to the throne during a brief period of civil strife, just as Severus had. Finally, for Severus and his son, the act of restoring the temple could be seen as an act of piety toward the cult of the deified emperors, a sign of respect for Rome's history. Having surveyed the projects of these individual projects carried out by Severus in the Lower Forum, we ought now to examine them as a whole, to see if this seemingly diverse group of projects might reflect a total program for the Roman Forum. Before Severus, several emperors constructed entirely new fora, separate from the old Roman forum. And these you see in this slide, the various imperial fora. And for sort of orientation, if you see where Basilica Aemilia is in sort of the lower right part, that of course gives you where the forum is. So these are basically to the northeast of the Roman Forum. The Curia backed up directly against the Forum of Caesar when that was built. So here we have the Forum Iulium. This is Julius Caesar building the first such sort of extension of the Roman Forum, known as the Forum Iulium. And this included a temple to Venus Genetrix that was dedicated in the year 46 BCE, a statue of his favorite horse, to which the figure of Caesar as a rider was added after his death, and a row of shops along its west side. In 2 BCE, we have Augustus dedicating his forum with its temple of Mars Ultor, or Mars the Avenger, as the focal point. This is also where the recaptured or the returned standards of the Parthians were displayed eventually. And this forum was flanked by porticos that were decorated both inside and out. The interior niches of the porticos in the Forum of Augustus carried the statues and inscriptions of the so-called summi viri, that is to say, a program of sculptures focusing on the great legendary and historical men of Rome's past, a sort of almost history lesson in a way, or an ancestry for the Roman Empire. Actual Romans such as Appius Claudius Caecus and Scipio Africanus, and the legendary figures such as Aeneas, Romulus, and King Numa were portrayed here. On the exterior, the attic of the portico was adorned with caryatids, these female figures acting as columns, that were copied from the Erechtheion in Athens, and between these were imagines clipeatae, shields with images of Zeus Ammon, and barbarian types alternating, and these included a Gallic type and a Parthian type, it seems, alluding to, again, the conquests of Augustus. A quadriga bearing a statue of Augustus stood in the plaza before the Temple of Mars, and within the temple were displayed the Parthian standards, as I mentioned, that were recovered by Tiberius in 20 BC. Under the Flavian emperors, 2 more imperial fora were added. Vespasian built the Templum Pockets, or Temple of Peace, following his capture of Jerusalem, and this probably also served to celebrate the end of the civil war that brought him to power. The Templum Pockets was a large enclosure that, in addition to the Temple of Peace, included libraries, a sculpture garden, and water displays, as we have now discovered in more recent years and looking at the new excavations there. The temple itself was a bit unusual in that it was not separate from the surrounding enclosure, but was distinguished from the rest of the portico only by having larger columns of colored marble. Domitian's Forum, the Forum Transitorium, but also known as the Forum of Nerva, given Domitian's Damnatio Memoriae, represents a monumentalization of the Argillatum, which was a major thoroughfare that connected the Subura on the Esquiline Hill to the Roman Forum. The construction of this forum united all of the existing imperial fora at that time into a maze of architecture and passageways. The Temple of Minerva stood at the east end of the forum, and this you could enter, if you see where the temple is in the slide, just immediately to its right, there's a small sort of arched way that led from, on the other side of that was something known as the Porticus Obsidata, that is to say a sort of rounded apsed porticus, and you could enter from that end. This was a rather narrow forum. It could not accommodate full porticos. Instead, you have columns that are set very close to these surrounding walls, and then these flat pilasters behind them to create a sort of pseudo-porticus here. The attic had of this, where bits of it survive, there are relief panels that illustrate personified provinces, as well as a figural frieze, part of which that survives shows the story of Arachne and her punishment by the goddess Athena, or Minerva as the Romans knew of her. The Domitianic Forum also housed a shrine to Janus Quadriphons. The last of the imperial fora was built under Trajan and designed by his favored architect, Apollodorus. The complex was dedicated in 112, while the famous column was dedicated in the following year. The entrance to the Forum of Trajan was through a monumental gateway, and this was much like a triumphal arch. After crossing the wide expanse of the plaza, which was adorned with porticos and large hemicycles along its sides, and included a decorative program with Dacian prisoners and Roman legionary standards, the visitor would reach the Basilica Ulpia, running crosswise to the forum here, and passing through this would have reached finally the Column of Trajan with its spiral relief, and on either side of that, there were the Greek and Latin libraries, and at the very far north end was the Temple of Trajan and Plotina, most likely added following Trajan's death. For all the variety that these imperial fora exhibit, they do share some common features. They all have self-contained spaces that consist of an open plaza, flanking porticos, a temple, and a decorative scheme that often reflected the emperor's policies or programs. We can compare the work of Severus in the Roman Forum to the arrangement of these earlier imperial fora with regard to both composition and decoration. In terms of the compositional elements, there's an open forum, that's the light green area on the slide, the Severin repaving of this lower forum. The flanking porticos, well, they pre-existed. These are the Julio-Claudian era buildings, the basilicas Aemilia and Julia. The temple overlooking the plaza, the restored Temple of Vespasian, now with an inscription naming Severus and his son on it. In terms of the decorative scheme, we have a triumphal entrance. We have the Severan arch in the northwest corner that builds on the theme of the Parthian victories begun by Augustus with his own arch, and the decoration of the Basilica Aemilia with sculptures of captive Parthians. A monumental statue of the emperor is included here, the Equestrian of Severus at the Forum center, indicated by the purple square that is sort of where those arrows intersect. And the existing sculpture, of course, of past emperors and honored Romans and deities in the Forum, though not a program in and of themselves, would have had a similar spirit to the sculptures displayed in the Augustan Forum. So in essence, Severus usurped the space of the Roman Forum as his own imperial forum. Why do this instead of building his own new forum, where he could have had perhaps grander monuments? Well, one possibility certainly, and the most likely to me, seems that, it would take a lot of space. And by using the space of the Roman Forum, this was part of his political message. By putting his major victory monument in the Roman Forum, Severus was inserting himself into this tradition and history of Rome. His legitimacy as emperor depended on demonstrating his ties to the past, his connection to his predecessors, especially Marcus Aurelius, but also Augustus and Vespasian. Severus's presence in the Roman Forum validated his authority and portrayed him as a traditionalist in a bit of a nudge-nudge, wink-wink sort of way, because of course he had usurped the tradition. Visual imagery and the public space already established in the Roman Forum and shaped it to his own purpose, portraying himself as a legitimate part of Rome's history. And with that, I will end, and thank you very much for your time.